Swain has the issue of, like, we tend to not be able to buff him, even though he feels weak, because his win rate is very, very high. Definitely a victim of our balance strategy. He's a character who, despite having a high win rate, does not feel powerful at that win rate. 7, 8 years ago, the way Swain would have been balanced is he just would have been stronger. My personal take on Swain is I genuinely just believe we're supposed to make him significantly less fair. Like, just way, way, way less fair. What about giving Conqueror back its true damage? Tanks are too strong. I do not think it is correct to make tanks weak by making a pre-game system ruin their identity. The problem with Conqueror having true damage is it means that a property of every single character who takes Conqueror, which is, by the way, most bruisers if it's any good, a property of them is that they beat tanks. And that ends up making tanks feel terrible because they're like, this bruiser, without any cost whatsoever, just gets to beat me. It's okay if, like, a champion has that, right? You know, like Yasuo has armor pen or something. But if the entire bruiser class has to get that, regardless of who they are, purely through a pregame system, I think that's a heavily flawed design, personally. That's why I prefer that if there is a pregame system that causes, like, tanks to... if there is a system that's going to counter tanks, I'd rather read it in the item system, because the item system can come with trade-offs. If you buy armor pen, you're not buying something else, and that has a cost to it, which is just not the case when it comes to the rune system. So, personally don't think making Conqueror have true damage on it would be very good for the game, even if tanks are OP. I think there'd be better ways to fix tanks. You only care about high pick rate champions. Riot messed up 2 Swain works, and latest of which made him the worst champ in the game. If this doesn't work, 90% of the Swain mains will quit. Well, you could argue 90% of the Swain mains have already quit if you're saying all his reworks are failed, right? The reality is that Swain just isn't the most popular character, never has been. That doesn't mean we couldn't improve him, though. I definitely agree with you that he's in a rough spot. I think he's one of the characters who's definitely a victim of our balance strategy. He's a character who, despite having a high win rate, does not feel powerful at that win rate. Historically, he just would have had a higher win rate. Like, straight up, like, you know, 7, 8 years ago, the way Swain would have been balanced is he just would have been stronger, right? And that would have made up for the fact that he's, you know, a lot more fair, a lot rougher to play. Nowadays, we balance characters into a much tighter band of power, which means characters like EZREAL tend to chill because he feels really, really, really good at low win rates. And kind of like the simpler characters who are easier to take advantage of tend to feel a lot worse to play because they tend to need to have a higher westing win rate to feel like they're truly powerful against characters like Yasuo. Now, you could argue that, well, hey, if a character needs to win all their games to be fun, maybe they need some work. And I think that's a reasonable argument, right? Like, yeah, maybe the issue is very well could be that just Swain needs work. His kit needs to be legitimately more fun, right? And so there's definitely like a push and pull of, are you bribing players with power to play a character, or do they just legitimately feel weak and need some help? And like there's a bit of both. Swain has the issue of, like, we tend to not be able to buff him, even though he feels weak, because his win rate is very, very high. My personal take on Swain is I genuinely just believe we're supposed to make him significantly less fair. Like, just way, way, way less fair. I think his E is a prime culprit for him feeling bad. Because I think Swain's E spell, if you compare it to a character like, say, Morgana, it's not for Swain. It's not for Swain to throw at you and hit and feel like he's a powerful character. It's for his opponents to dodge and then kind of laugh at him because, Lamau, you tried to hit that thing. So I think that is an example of a spell that, despite it having good gameplay and that it's fair and you can dodge it, it doesn't feel like Swain really has any ability to make it work with his kit in the way that he appreciates, which ends up resulting in a character who, despite the fact that he wins a lot, doesn't really feel powerful when doing so. And so if I was to personally give a take on Swain, it would be, we should do work to legitimately make him a less fair champion. Because I think that's one of the reasons that characters like EZREAL feel really, really good at low win rates. Part of it is because Ezreal is legitimately strong at low win rates, because he has a lot of agency, right? There's so many outplays you could do, but also there's a lot of things about Ezreal that just, are for Ezreal. They aren't for his opponents. Like when Ezreal uses his E, there's no counterplay for the opponents when Ezreal uses his E. Ezreal's E is, I get out of jail free right now. And then the counterplay, of course, is it's on cooldown, so how are you going to play around that, right? But like Ezreal's E is for Ezreal in a way that, like, if you could imagine a spell that says like channel for 1 second and then dash, that could be a good spell, but that spell is more often for whoever you're fighting against, because they have the opportunity to interrupt the channel. So yeah, I think Swain is a complicated problem with a variety of potential ways he could be solved. But I would argue that it's a little silly to say we only care about popular champs. If we only cared about popular champs, we wouldn't have reworked Skarner. If we only cared about popular champs, we wouldn't have reworked Talia. If we only cared about popular champs, we wouldn't have reworked Swain twice. If we only cared about popular champs, we wouldn't have reworked Volibear. Like, if we only cared about popular champs, we wouldn't have done like the majority of VGUs that we have done, right? If we only cared about popular champs, we wouldn't fix Yorick bugs, right? I think it's actually a little silly to say that like we only care about popular champs when we are actively doing work on many of our unpopular champs to try to make them better. That said, there is a bar of popularity below which if a character rests there, we're like, well, they probably do need truly a rework as opposed to just tuning and balance, right? Like we removed Old Aurelian Soul from the game for a new Aurelian Soul because it was just like, hey, this character, regardless of what we do with him, is just below the minimum bar of like what people seem to be wanting or enjoying to play. A higher level of telegraphing where the power is visible and easily telegraphed on Swain's R and W is likely to solve the problem. I don't really know what you mean by that, right? Like it's pretty obvious what Swain's R is good at, and it's pretty obvious what counters it. And when you play Swain, it feels a lot worse when you get countered than when you pop off. And we could fix that by making his ultimate significantly more powerful so that it's a lot easier to pop off on it, but we don't have room to do it because his win rate is too high, which is what I was talking about with like the win rate issue, right? So I don't necessarily agree with you that Swain is a character that people just don't get him. I think people do get Swain, but when you get Swain, the reward doesn't feel worth the downsides. And we're not able to give him the power to make the reward worth it with the current way his kit is tuned. And I think that's the difficulty. Liandry's is OP because burst sucks. That's another possibility. It's possible the reason Liandry's is so strong and so present is because it could very well be kind of like pointless to build burst. Because if you build burst, it's like, okay, nice job, bro. You built burst. You built burst and then what, right? It is possible that burst is weak. That is a possibility. What about ZOE? I think ZOE has been uniquely punished by all of the reductions to burst damage that we've done over the last few years, and we would probably need to do some work on her to make her less burst reliant as a character to be effective, is my opinion. Specifically, I wonder if she's gotten too one-note when it's so much harder to burst characters. So things I would wonder about with ZOE is like maybe we should like give her bubble chaining back. If you don't know, ZOE used to be able to, if she hit a bubble, she'd get reduced cooldown on future bubbles. And so ZOE, even if she's not killing you, as long as she's hitting bubbles, can like have a lot of CC effectiveness in a team fight, as an example. Like maybe she needs that back. It's complicated though because ZOE, from my understanding, is very popular and powerful and high ban rate in China. So it's not necessarily the case that she's like not strong or not perceived to be strong.